face.
Okay, let's talk about sex and diabetes. How can diabetes affect my sex life or anyone's sex life living with diabetes?
So it's such an important topic because, again, it's something that you don't really feel comfortable generally kind of talking to your provider about. So I think of it in terms of like, what does low blood sugar do to your sex life, and then what does high blood sugar do? So low blood sugar is kind of the easy one, in the sense that if your blood sugar is low, it's just not happening. I mean, for guys or girls, I mean, you're in this like state of anxiety and you just generally don't feel good. And physically for guys, it's where they can, not get an erection. There's just other things going on in the body that are more important. It's literally your body saying fight or flight, you are dying, and sex is just not happening right now. So treat your low blood sugars, for God's sakes. The good news is that they can generally recover pretty quickly, and then you can, decide to have sex or not. For high blood sugars, it's a little more complicated. That in the moment, if your blood sugars are really high in the moment, that can be an issue. You just don't feel so good. Your, mouth might be dry. You just kind of feel kind of uncomfortable. Generally, that's not as profound as kind of low blood sugars, but it's just kind of annoying. But then in the long term, if you have high blood sugars, that can cause issues with, for guys, and it can lead to impotence, and sometimes that's a complication that guys care more about, rather than saying in 20 years you might get blurred vision or kidney issues. If you say, hey, you might become impotent, that can be more important to people, and it's a little bit more acute. And then for women, it can cause issues with like yeast infections, urinary tract infections, high blood sugars, and of course that can kind of affect your sex life. So in general, it's just kind of like the same information as every day. You try to stay in range as best as you can, and these extreme highs or lows are going to affect your sex life, like I just mentioned.
Okay, so as a follow-up to that question, how can sex impact my blood sugars?
Yeah, so sex is a form of exercise. So in general, it tends to lower your blood sugar. And it's just something that you have to be aware of, that during sex, it can kind of acutely drop too. So this is another place that having a CGM can be helpful, because you can kind of start feeling like, I'm feeling odd, I don't really what's going on. And just being aware that you are burning calories, you're burning sugar, and it generally will lower your blood sugars.
So how do I communicate about my diabetes with like a hookup or a one-night stand? Like, do I need to tell them? Like, what should I do?
Yeah, well, the good news about type 1 diabetes, this is important to know, is that you cannot transmit it. So this isn't something that you can give to somebody else. And that's important because that means it is a private decision of when you would decide to tell somebody or not. Just like if you had knee pain or if you had cancer, it's your own kind of like private information. So, and this kind of falls to the individual. They can be very vocal. Hey, here's what's going on with my diabetes. These are the devices I have, et cetera, et cetera. Great. Somebody might not be comfortable with that, and there's no need to kind of disclose it unless something like comes up in the moment that has to be addressed. But otherwise, you don't owe it to that person in that moment to really disclose it to them. And that might evolve over the course of the relationship. It's certainly kind of a one-night stand. It's your choice. So I don't know, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think for me, it's sort of like if you don't want to make it a thing, it doesn't need to be a thing. For me personally, like I wear medical devices, it's going to be clear that like they're going to know. But I think like the more you say about it, the more it becomes a thing. And so especially if it's like a one night stand or a hookup and you don't necessarily see that going anywhere, necessarily owe that person a deep explanation, and it might not be helpful to you or them to have that information. Certainly if you start to see somebody more regularly or more often, it might become, if you're hanging out for an evening, maybe you don't need to tell them. Mm-hmm. If you're staying the night, now we might have to have a little bit of a conversation, right? About like, well, if I beep, I need you to wake me up. Or like, do you have food in the house, mm-hmm. right? There are concerns that would evolve depending on how it goes. Mm-hmm. But yeah, in general, I think like, if you make it a thing, it'll be a thing. But you shouldn't have to share any more than you're comfortable with. And if you just say like, oh yeah, that's my insulin pump, I have diabetes, keep on moving. Mm-hmm. I don't think that in that moment they're going to care.
How can I make myself feel most like safe and secure during sex while managing my diabetes? Like what would that really look like?
As you say sex, people's minds like blow up with all these different ideas. It's really just how you would approach exercise. You're thinking about highs, lows, when you can disconnect your pump, your CGM, having snacks, all those kinds of things are the exact same topics when it comes to sex. It's just that there's somebody else involved, and it might be how much do you have to like let them know about these devices and things like that. That's a little bit different than if you were going for a run.
It's really just avoiding hypo. If you go a little high, that's not a big deal. You're not going to go into ketoacidosis in, a short period of time like that. So I think that's the main thing. Just know where you're at with your blood sugar, that you're not going to get low.
Let's say that, I've been out drinking and now I'm going to be having sex. Like, what should I be prepared for my blood sugar to do?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So first of all, alcohol in itself it's a huge topic and so important to talk about, because people will say alcohol makes my blood sugars go up or go down. It really depends on what you're drinking. Beer has a lot of carbs and will make your blood sugars, go up, but then hard alcohol has no carbs, so it'll generally make your blood sugars go down. But at the end of the day, the effect of alcohol in of itself is to lower your blood sugars. And then again, sex is a form of exercise, so that also can lower your blood sugars. So it can be a real setup for a dangerous hypo, kind of this 1-2 punch where you have, alcohol on board and you're exercising, and then you're just impaired awareness of, of my blood sugars and what's going on. So that's where you have to be really, really, really careful with what your blood sugars are. Ideally having a CGM on board, but if not, at minimum kind of testing before and then, soon after to see kind of where you're at, having snacks, glucagon, all that kind of usual stuff. But again, really the name of the game there is hypos.
I have a little bit of a spicy situation. So you have someone, brought them home, and you guys are kind of in the middle of things, and at this point in this whatever relationship it is with this person, you haven't told them or disclosed that you have type 1 diabetes, but your low alarm's going off. Like, what is the protocol here? What do you do? What's your game plan in the moment? I'd be curious to hear all of your responses.
That's a really good question. I think, honestly, like, for me, it's a situation that's going to course correct itself. Like, when you go low, you get really out of it, and like, it's going to be very obvious. And it's a showstopper, and that's kind of not negotiable. And so it's really kind of about how you handle it. I think the best way to approach it in that moment is with just like a touch of humor and just explaining what's going on. Because this person might be, for lack of a better word, alarmed by your alarms and not really knowing what's going on. And like, now you're sort of like in a different state than they met you, right? So explaining like, hey, just a second, that's my blood sugar, I'm a diabetic, I just need to eat something really quickly, like, be right with you, I think.
Probably get what you mean by it's going to handle itself. So first of all, the sexy, spicy situation is just not happening if your blood sugar is low. The other thing is that most people, I know for myself, when my blood sugar is low, I just completely withdraw. I'm not able to really communicate or even have humor. So it would just be kind of like, I would probably just disappear and then, go to the fridge, whatever, treat it. And then it really is about the potential embarrassment or whatever like you might feel after that. And that's just where it comes down to your personal, the way that you roll with life. Hey, sorry, I have my diabetes, my blood sugar's low, but I'm back, I'm good to go. Or it could be more of a conversation or whatever kind of feels natural in that moment. But, as us doctors speaking, is for God's sakes, treat your low. You should always do that no matter what situation you're in. And then when your brain kind of comes back, then you can, regroup and address whatever was going on.